Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to be exploring the idea that our minds and bodies are way more connected than we often think. We're going to be taking a deep dive into Gabor Maté's book, When the Body Says No, The Cost of Hidden Stress.
It's a really fascinating book. It really challenges that conventional idea that our minds and bodies are these totally separate things.
Yeah.
Maté argues that all that unresolved emotional stress that we carry around, especially stuff from our childhood, it can actually show up as physical illness later in life.
So, our bodies are literally talking to us through illness.
Exactly. He calls it a kind of wisdom, like the body's way of saying, hey, pay attention to me. Something's not right here. And when we ignore those whispers, it can, turn into a shout in the form of chronic illness.
Okay, wow. That's a pretty mind-blowing concept.
Yeah.
So what kind of evidence does he use to back this up?
He uses a lot of scientific research, but also these really compelling stories of real patients.
Okay.
He talks about this woman named Mary who developed scleroderma.
And scleroderma is, it's a disease that hardens the skin and organs, right?
Yeah, it's a pretty serious condition. And her story is like a really powerful illustration of how these deep-seated patterns of behavior, often, stemming from childhood, can actually contribute to this kind of chronic stress and potentially trigger serious illness.
So what was it about Mary's life that might have led to this?
Well, Mary had spent her whole life being a people pleaser. She always put everyone else's needs before her own. She couldn't say no.
Hmm.
And she had a really hard time expressing her own emotions, especially anger. She kept everything bottled up inside, trying to keep everyone happy.
So basically she was living in a constant state of stress.
Exactly. And Maté believes that this chronic stress, this repression of her emotions, is what may have contributed to her developing scleroderma.
That's incredibly sad. Is this a common pattern that you see in your work? I mean, do you see this in other patients with chronic illnesses?
It is. It's really fascinating, actually. Mary's experience is not unique at all. I mean, Maté talks about all these other patients with a whole range of conditions like MS, ALS, even cancer, and they often have this history of repressing their emotions, especially anger. A lot of them are people pleasers, perfectionists. They need to be in control all the time.
But underneath it all, there's this simmering pot of stress just waiting to boil over.
Exactly. And so then the question becomes, well, where do these patterns come from? Are we born with them or do we learn them?
Right. Nature versus nurture.
Yeah. And Maté actually dives into that debate in a really interesting way. He introduces this concept called the biology of belief, which basically says that our early experiences, especially in childhood, can actually program our cells and influence how our bodies react to stress throughout our lives.
Wait, so you're saying that what happens to us as kids can literally change our biology?
That's exactly what he's saying. And there's actually quite a bit of research from epigenetics and psychoneuroimmunology that supports this idea. It suggests that if a child grows up feeling unsafe, unloved, or unheard, they may develop these coping mechanisms that help them survive emotionally in the short term.
But those same coping mechanisms could actually end up harming their health in the long run.
Exactly. And it's not about blaming parents or caregivers, but it's about understanding how crucial those early experiences are for our well-being, both physically and emotionally.
Wow. This is already blowing my mind, and we're just getting started. So are there, specific examples of these beliefs that can lead to stress and illness?
Oh, definitely. And they're not always what you might expect.
Right.
For example, he talks about the belief that it's wrong to be angry.
Okay.
And he illustrates this with the story of Jean, a woman who repressed her anger after being abused as a child. She later developed MS.
Wow. That's a really powerful example of how, holding on to all that anger, all that pain can really manifest in the body.
It is. It's a really heartbreaking story. And he also talks about the belief that you're responsible for the whole world. He uses the example of Leslie, a social worker who had ulcerative colitis, and she felt this, overwhelming need to save everyone.
So a lot of these beliefs seem to revolve around self-sacrifice, like not setting boundaries.
Exactly. And Maté actually talks a lot about the importance of autonomy and attachment in maintaining good health. He says that a lack of autonomy, which often starts in childhood, when our needs weren't met consistently, can be a huge source of stress for adults.
So how do we break free from these patterns? Can we actually rewire our brains and bodies, especially after, maybe a difficult childhood?
That's a great question, and that's something we're going to be diving into in the next part of our deep dive. We're going to explore some of Maté's strategies for healing, including something he calls negative thinking.
Negative
I
thinking.
know, it sounds a little counterintuitive, but I promise it's not what you think.
Okay, I'm intrigued. I'll definitely be back for more.
Me too.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Before the break, we were talking about how our early experiences can really shape our health and well-being. We were talking about Mate's idea of the biology of belief and how certain beliefs we pick up early on, while maybe helpful then, can lead to stress and even illness as adults.
Right, and it's important to remember that a lot of this is happening on an unconscious level. It's not like we're choosing to believe these things. They're just kind of wired into us. They become these patterns in our nervous systems.
And they affect how we see the world and how we react to things.
Exactly. So the question is, how do we even become aware of these unconscious beliefs? And, more importantly, how do we change them if they're causing us harm?
Yeah, how do we do that?
Well, that's where Matea's concept of negative thinking comes in.
Negative thinking. Okay, I'm already a little skeptical.
I know, right? It sounds counterintuitive, but he doesn't mean like dwelling on negative thoughts or being pessimistic.
Okay, so what does he mean?
He's talking about honest self-reflection, like really facing those uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our past, even if it means, questioning that whole happy childhood thing.
I can see how that would be challenging.
It can be, for sure, but it can also be incredibly freeing
How so?
because by bringing those unconscious beliefs into the light, by actually examining them, we can start to understand how they're playing out in our lives, how they might be affecting our health. And once we understand them, we can start to, challenge them, question them, and ultimately change them.
So we've identified these potentially harmful beliefs. We're becoming more aware of them. But how do we actually go about changing these patterns?
Well, Maté suggests a number of strategies. A lot of them have to do with reconnecting with our bodies and learning to listen to what they're telling us.
Okay.
Things like mindfulness and self-compassion, practices that help us become more attuned to our physical sensations and our emotional states.
So instead of ignoring those signals, we should actually pay attention to them.
Yeah, exactly. It's about, listening to those whispers before they become screams.
That makes sense. And it's not just about listening, right? It's also about understanding what those messages mean.
Absolutely. Like if you're constantly getting headaches or having digestive issues, it could be your body's way of saying that you're holding on to a lot of anger or anxiety.
So it seems like a lot of what Mate is saying is about taking back our power, learning to set boundaries, and, really honoring our own needs.
Right. He talks a lot about the importance of autonomy. He argues that a lack of autonomy, which often stems from childhood experiences where our needs weren't consistently met, can create this chronic state of stress, and that stress can contribute to all sorts of health problems down the road.
So how do we start to reclaim that autonomy? Especially if we've been conditioned to be people pleasers or to put everyone else's needs before our own.
Well, it's a process for sure, but it starts with noticing those moments when our bodies are saying no, and then having the courage to honor those signals.
So that might mean saying no to a request, even if it makes someone else unhappy.
It might. It might also mean setting boundaries in our relationships or taking time for ourselves, even if it feels selfish.
But it's not selfish, right?
Exactly. Taking care of ourselves is not selfish, it's essential. It's actually the opposite of selfish because when we're depleted and running on empty, we can't show up fully for ourselves or for anyone else.
That's a good point. It seems like Mate is offering a very different way of thinking about health and illness.
He is. It's not just about treating the symptoms, but about really understanding the root causes, the emotional and psychological factors that might be contributing to what he calls dis-ease.
Yeah, disease. I like that.
And one of the things I find so compelling about his work is that he challenges us to look at health and illness in a much more holistic way, to recognize that our minds, bodies, and spirits are all connected.
This has been so fascinating. I mean, to think that we have the power to heal ourselves, not just through medicine, but also through understanding our emotions and changing our thoughts and behaviors, it's pretty amazing.
It is. It's a radical shift in perspective, but one that I think is long overdue. And what's really cool is that Maté doesn't just present these ideas in a theoretical way. He also gives practical strategies and examples of people who have used these principles to heal from a wide range of conditions.
Okay, well, I'm definitely eager to dive into those examples and learn more about those practical strategies. What do you say we pick up there after the break?
Sounds good to me.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been exploring some really deep stuff with Gabor Maté's book, When the Body Says No. The idea that all those bottled up emotions can actually turn into physical illness, and how so much of this goes back to what happened to us way back when, in childhood.
Yeah, it's like our past is living in our bodies, even if we're not aware of it.
So if someone's listening and thinking, hey, maybe this is me, maybe I've been pushing down my feelings for way too long, what can they do? Like, where do they even begin to heal?
Well, Mate offers some really practical strategies, but he's also really clear that healing, it's not like a quick fix. It's a journey.
Yeah.
It's about taking small steps, being patient with ourselves, and, really getting to know ourselves, like, deeply. And one of the first steps he talks about is cultivating self-awareness.
Okay, so what does that look like? Like, how do we become more self-aware?
It starts with paying attention to our bodies, like really tuning in to those subtle signals they're sending us. Noticing our physical sensations, our emotions, without judging them.
So if I'm feeling anxious, instead of trying to push that feeling away, I should
Yeah.
just sit with it.
Exactly. It's about acknowledging those feelings like, hey, anxiety, I see you. And then, trying to understand what that feeling is trying to tell you, like what's going on. Mate also talks a lot about self-compassion.
Self-compassion.
Yeah.
So like being kind to ourselves.
Exactly. It's about treating ourselves with the same kindness and understanding that we would offer to, a close friend. We all mess up sometimes. We all have flaws.
Right.
And it's about, recognizing that and offering ourselves support instead of beating ourselves up.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of what Mate is saying goes against like what we're often told.
Yeah.
Like be strong, push through the pain, don't give up, all that stuff.
It does. It really challenges a lot of those societal norms.
Mm.
And I think he's making a really important point, that true strength comes from vulnerability, from being able to admit when we're struggling, from allowing ourselves to actually feel our emotions.
So instead of suppressing our anger or sadness,
Mm,
we should learn how to express them in healthy ways.
exactly. And expressing them doesn't mean, dumping them on other people. It's about finding healthy outlets,
Okay.
whether it's journaling, talking to a therapist, exercising, whatever works for you.
Mate also talks a lot about the importance of connection, like how connecting with others can be a really important part of healing.
It's true. We're social creatures. We need each other. Feeling connected, feeling loved and supported. It's so important for our well-being.
It's like having a safety net when things get tough.
It is. And it's not just about having people around. It's about the quality of those connections.
Mm.
Making sure we're surrounding ourselves with people who make us feel safe, loved, accepted.
So it sounds like Mate is offering a pretty different perspective on health and healing,
Mm.
like recognizing that our physical, emotional, and social well-being are all intertwined.
Right. It's not just about treating the symptoms. It's about addressing the whole person. And I think that's one of the things that makes his work so powerful.
Yeah.
It's this reminder that we have so much more power to heal ourselves than we often realize.
This has been such a fascinating conversation. And I think Mate really leaves us with a lot to think about. Like, if our bodies are talking to us, what are they trying to say?
It's a great question. And it's one that I encourage all of our listeners to explore. What is your body trying to tell you? What wisdom is waiting to be unlocked? And if you want to dive deeper into this stuff, we highly recommend checking out Gabor Mate's When the Body Says No. It's an incredible book. We'll be sure to put a link in the show notes so you can pick up a copy. And please share this episode with anyone you think might benefit from it. And until next time, keep diving deep.